On Saturday, I read through Pericles, Prince of Tyre with three of my friends, a very normal thing to do on a sunny Saturday afternoon. According to a graph I found, Pericles is the least performed, or at least the Shakespeare play that fewest people have seen. That's why I asked my friends to read it through with me, because I thought there was very little chance that I would ever get to see a production of Pericles, let alone be in one. So I thought I might as well. Although one of my friends who I read through with is a professional actor, and he claimed that he was in a production of Pericles, a professional production, about 20 years ago. So there's always hope. Pericles, if you know anything about it, is you probably know it as the Shakespeare play, which has incest. I'll get into that in a second. I won't get into incest. I'm never going to get into incest, but I'll get into the plot point of incest in a second. But first, I just want to run down the plot summary of Pericles, partially so that the things I say later will have some context, but also partially because, honestly, I'm already starting to forget what happens myself, and I want to try and remember. This is part of the reason I think this play isn't very well beloved, is the plot is very easy to forget because it's mostly based on nonsense and happenstance. I'm going to give as many character names as I think is necessary. Again, there's so much that happens in this play, and very little of it is of consequence, but I'll give character names where I think I have to. So Pericles goes to Antioch, where the king, Antiochus, has a beautiful daughter, but no one's allowed to marry her unless they can solve a riddle, because secretly Antiochus is banging his daughter, and he doesn't want anyone else to have the privilege, so they have to answer a riddle or else they can't marry her. And the answer to the riddle is incest. And Pericles figures this out immediately, and thus figures out that Antiochus is having sex with his own daughter. Antiochus realizes that Pericles has figured this out and sends an assassin after him. Pericles returns to Tyre, of which he is prince, it's in the title, and his advisor Helicanus is like, well, you're going to have to leave for a while, Pericles, you can't be here, you're dangerous. And so Pericles leaves and appoints Helicanus as the steward of Tyre, the Denethor of Tyre, if you will. He's not Denethor, he's much nicer, he's much more sane than Denethor. And then Pericles goes to the kingdom of Cleon and Dionysa, where there's no food. Cleon and Dionysa are kind of fuckwits. They're the king and queen. They kind of mess things up. They're not very good at ruling, and there's no food. But Pericles arrives, and he's got tons of food with him. So they all like him. But then he just immediately sets off again. It's not really explained. Then Pericles gets shipwrecked. This will happen to him a lot. He gets shipwrecked in a foreign shore where there's another princess who's waiting to be married off, who's also beautiful, and there's also been a contest set up by her father. You have to do something to prove worthy to marry the princess. But this time it's not because the dad is banging the daughter, thank God. He just, I don't know, I guess he's just very protective. Or he really likes jousting, because the contest is jousting. Anyway, Pericles is super good at jousting, so he gets to marry Tyre, who is the princess. And then Tyre and Pericles set off on a ship. Tyre is pregnant, she gives birth, and then appears to die. And because they're in another storm, because he's about to be shipwrecked again, Pericles, they have to throw Tyre's coffin overboard so that she's not allowed to be in the boat anymore. They throw Tyre overboard. She is immediately rescued by. Hold, please. She's rescued by Cerimon, who is also a king, but he's like a mad genius king. He's like Dr. Frankenstein. He either resurrects her or she turns out she wasn't dead and he just revives her. This text isn't super clear on this. Anyway, Cerimon revives Tyre, brings her back to the land of the living, and Tyre's like, I'm gonna become a nun. I'm not sure if you're allowed to be a nun after you've already had a kid, but whatever. Anyway, Pericles still has his daughter by Tyre. He names the daughter Marina because she's born at sea and he's super clever. They go back to the land of Cleon and Dionysa, the fuckwit rulers from earlier who were letting their subjects starve. Pericles has to go back to Tyre because the citizens of Tyre are demanding that Helicanus become the new ruler, but Helicanus doesn't want to, and if it doesn't happen within a year, if the ruler doesn't come back within a year, there's going to be a revolt, I think. And Pericles is like, I can't take my daughter with me, so he leaves Marina, his daughter, with Cleon and Dionysa, and he goes back to Tyre to be the ruler. And then Cleon and Dionysa get jealous of Marina's beauty. Well, mostly Dionysa. Cleon doesn't seem to care that much. Dionysa gets super jealous of Marina's beauty because her own daughter, whose name I'm not going to say because there's too many names already, is being ignored because Marina's there. So Dionysa hires someone to kill Marina. He can't because as he's about to kill Marina, pirates interrupt. Pirates kidnap Marina and sell her into sex slavery in another country, Myrtildon, I think it's called. Yeah. Thankfully, Marina is just so good. She's such a goodly person, and she speaks so eloquently, and she's so clearly of noble birth. You just have to look at her to know that she's not like the other prostitutes in the brothel, that no man will touch her. They come in ready to have sex with a prostitute, and she talks to them, and they refuse, and then they see the light, and they leave, and they never come back. So the brothel owners are super annoyed at this because they're not getting any coin. They're like, gotta stop doing that, Marina. You've gotta stop doing that. And then a lord comes in. His name is Lysimachus. And he is of noble birth, we're told. He's a noble lord. He is definitely visiting prostitutes. That is 100% why he is in the brothel that day. And they're like, well, Lysimachus will see to this uppity wench. And he goes in to talk to Marina. And he also finds her so charming that he immediately decides to never visit prostitutes again. Sure. Pericles goes to Cleon and Dionysa and is like, where's my daughter? And they say she died because as far as they're concerned, she did. Pericles is so grief-stricken that he vows to never cut his hair again, which is why I look like this. This exact same thing happened to me, all of it, 100%. This is what he literally says that he will go unscissored. And again, same, never been scissored. Pericles and like me, samesies. Pericles starts wandering the sea again because that has worked out so well for him in the past. By complete happenstance, he ends up in Mytilene where Marina is, and he just happens to run into Lysimachus, and Lysimachus is like, oh, and Pericles won't talk at this point. Pericles has been rendered mute by grief, and he just ends up in Mytilene, and everyone's like, oh man, it's such a shame. If only there was someone who could cheer him up. And Lysimachus is like, I know a woman. Don't ask me where I know her from, but she'll get him talking. And so Pericles meets with his daughter, who he thinks is a courtesan or prostitute or whatever. And thank God, she just sort of starts divulging her backstory. And Pericles is like, wow, I'm your dad. Otherwise, we could have had a repeat of Act 1. And then Diana, which is the goddess who, Tyre, Pericles' wife, who he thinks is dead, who's not, comes to Pericles in a dream, is like, go to my temple and tell them your story. And so Pericles does. And he meets his wife, who's there, and she's fine, yay! And Lysimachus and Marina get married again. Lysimachus was definitely willing to just, go with someone who'd been sold into sex slavery. That's definitely why he was there, but he still gets, they're still like, yeah, he's noble enough for her. Woo! And in the epilogue, Pericles burns down the home of Cleon and Dionysa with them inside. So, as you might have noticed, I had some trouble recalling key plot points, characters, and locations because there are just so many things in this play, and some of them have no bearing on anything. For example, when Pericles washes up in the, I think it's Ephesus is where Tysa's from. I don't. Again, there's so many names. When Pericles washes up in Tysa's home country, he's lost his armor and he can't do the jousting. But then there's three fishermen, and the three fishermen, one of the fishermen finds his armor and gives it to him. It's like, now remember this, I did you a good turn, you better repay it. And that never comes back. Nothing is ever done with that. It's strange. There are just a lot of dropped plot threads. If this were a modern, I hate to say it, but honestly, if you submitted this as a modern day writer, you would get back a lot of red pen. I'm sorry, Shakespeare, but I think if you weren't famous, you would not have sold this script. Just gonna say it. Yeah, there are some really nice bits. There are some good bits. There is a quite interesting discussion between Marina and the board, who is one of the brothel owners. And the board is a woman, and Marina sort of tries to appeal to her for her goodness and says, "Well, you're a woman. Like you can't let this happen to me." And the board's like, "Yeah, I'm a woman. I'm just like you, and I'm just like a man. I will do what I have to." That is interesting. Dionysa, actually, the jealous queen, is quite a fun role. She's very conniving, and she has quite a nice speech where her husband says that it's cruel to kill this teenage girl, and she's like, "Well, I think it's cruel to let our daughter wither on the vine." So there's some nice stuff there. I think if you were going to try and stage this, you would have to just lean into the comedy of a lot of it being pointless. I think you'd have to lean into the comedy because a lot of it is pointless. You would just have to try and make it a kind of broad farce, I think. I'm sure someone has done it dead straight and it's worked, but that's my feeling, is that you would have to try and make it a lot funnier than it is on the page, because just so much of it is kind of meaningless. And that is the overarching theme of the play, to be fair, is the randomness of fate, which fine, but it doesn't make for the most interesting reading experience. This is also, I think, one of the horniest Shakespeare plays. As I said, it starts off with incest, and it's kind of known as being the Shakespeare play where there's incest. There's really only incest in Act 1. Although, in Act 5, you're reading, if you read it, you're like, is the central tension of Act 5 meant to be, is Pericles going to unwittingly bang his daughter? Is that what I meant? Is this the dramatic irony that I know it's his daughter and he doesn't, and I'm just going to have to watch this guy bang his daughter, and then it's a bitter cycle, and it's going to start all over again, and Pericles is going to hide his daughter but behind a riddle, and the riddle is going to be about incest, and it's a time loop. That doesn't happen. Pericles breaks the cycle by talking to the woman that he's been sent to bang. So this is the moral of the story. Get to know someone before you have sex with them. That's what Shakespeare's saying. Yeah. It really doesn't hang together very well, this plot. There's some suggestions that it was written by two different people. So some people have said that the later half was Shakespeare and the earlier half was someone else. I guess I could believe that. I don't think it makes the play any more watchable. It kind of explains why it's bifurcated the way it, not bifurcated, what am I talking about? Bisected the way it is, or why it's so loosely threaded. And yeah, I think that Acts 3, 4, and 5 are more cohesive slightly, but again, it still doesn't make me like it more. There's also an interesting thing. I thought originally when I read it, I thought maybe it was one of the earlier Shakespeare plays. Apparently it's not. Apparently it's one of the later ones. which is strange because most of the play is in rhyme, I would say. Like over 50% is in rhyme. And it's not just the normal thing that we all learn about in school where it's like, you know, a scene's ending because the last two lines rhyme. No, it's just like most of it seems to be poetic, but there'll just be lines that don't rhyme. And I studied linguistics. You know, I studied Old English. I know that accents were different. I still don't think those lines would have rhymed even back then. They just have completely different. They just have completely different morphologies. They have completely different word structures. They would not rhyme at any time, unlike that. And it feels very unassured for someone who had written so many plays by then and had seen as much success as Shakespeare had seen in his lifetime to be like, well, maybe this one will be in rhyme, maybe it won't. I can't make up my mind. I think it would probably be better if it was all in rhyme. Some of the plot contrivances or some of the plot gaps might feel less glaring because you'd be like, well, he just did that to get the rhyme in. But he didn't do that. Other interesting things about this play, there are trios everywhere Pericles goes. There's three fishermen, or there's three noblemen, or there's three sailors, or there's three pirates, and I wonder if these were all meant to be played by like the same group of three people, just popping up again and again. I haven't looked into this. I think maybe that's kind of the idea. It's you know, it's like a recurring group of three people, and they're everywhere, but they're different characters now. You know, it's yeah. That I feel like Monty Python did that. You know, it's Monty Python-esque. It's a lot less funny than Monty Python. Don't get me wrong, but at least it's something. Yeah, I'm glad I read this through with my friends because, as I said, I don't think I'll ever get to see a professional production of Pericles. But my friends are good actors, and they managed to elevate the text, in my opinion. So that was nice. If you're just reading through it on your own, I'm not sure I could recommend it for that. But I mean, if you're a completionist like me, I've read through all the Shakes of Shakespeare. I've read through all the Shakes of Shakespeare. I've read through all the plays of Shakespeare once. I don't remember a lot of them, which is why I'm trying to do this thing now where I'm getting friends together to read them because I want to know what the content of the plays is, and you know he is a great writer. Hot take: William Shakespeare is good at writing plays. So even something like Pericles, there are scenes that are very enjoyable, and there are scenes that I think would work really well on stage. They're just surrounded by a lot of nonsense. Anyway, oh, also one last thing. A lot of people tell you that it's Pericles, Prince of Tyre. It's actually Tyre. It's not Tyre. It's Tyre. Well, it's not because in the play he rhymes Tyre with desire. So suck on that, whoever says that. And by whoever says that, I mean my literature professor who told me that it was pronounced that way. You're wrong. Read the damn play.